Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome all of our participants to our regularly scheduled Thursday afternoon webinar. And I see a lot of our regular participants on. I'm looking at the names in the participants dialogue right now. Welcome, everyone. I see everyone here who's been on the call before, so I'm not going to go through all of the logistics. I'm just going to quickly go ahead and get us started because we have an awful lot to cover. On the panel today, just myself and Steve Denny. Steve will do the presentation as always, and it's really interesting. I think of the metaphor of the old movie Jaws. Remember when in the movie when they say, just when you think it's safe to go back into the water? Well, just when you think we know exactly what this SBA, COVID relief package is all about, it changes again. So today, Steve will be presenting to you more on what we know and what has changed, because there are a significant amount that was clarified and clarified differently from as we had presented it before. So I'm not going to say much more. Steve, why don't you go ahead and take it away and tell them the details of what we learned over the course of the last week.
Awesome, Marquita, and you're exactly right. Every time we think this is settled and going to be final, right? We get a big clarification, and we received a big clarification on Monday, February 16th. So we'll go through that in detail, and we're going to share some other stuff as well. So just let me get my computer here to cooperate with us. This is our agenda for the day. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Economic Aid Act and the CARES Act updates, and provide some editorial comments as well, things that we know, and some of the facts around the program. We'll talk a little bit about the PPP overview. The SBA provided a large deck, and we're going to walk you through that today. And then we'll get into the SBA lending platform. So there are some things to know about new loans, and if you had existing loans, they've changed the rules a little bit. There's now what they call the SBA adjustment plan, which went into effect on Monday. And then we'll talk about EIDL. We've had a lot of questions about EIDL. We've got some answers to give you in that regard. And then we've had a lot of questions about the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, and we've got some clear guidance for you in that area as well. And then probably the most frequent questions we've received is regarding the employee retention tax credits. And we've got some additional detail for you in that area as well. So with that being said, let me move right into the SBA's overview. So they released this on February 3rd, and the deck was current as of that date. Fascinating to see the current round of PPP is, as they say, pacing steadily. So been quite a lot of loans. Interesting that the average loan size has gone down a little bit. I guess probably shouldn't be too surprised when they changed the eligibility to companies of less than 300 employees instead of those of less than 500 employees. But so far, as of this date, they've got $84 billion in approved money, and you can see what the trend has been by week. At this rate, the money will last through the end of March, so that's a good thing. If you're in need of it, it's a good thing. Next, they have provided some information about what they call the equitable access of funds. So this just shows you how the loan volume breaks up by first draw loans and second draw loans. And then if you'll recall, there was some community financial institution set aside money that's available. Surprisingly, I thought there would be more in that regard, but there's only about 3.8 billion of the 15 billion that's spoken for already. So plenty of money in that regard. We were participants on a webinar earlier today with the Minority Business Development Council in Denver and in Kansas City. And I think there's still a lot of misinformation that's out there about the availability of these funds. And I think hopefully we're spreading some information that's helpful in that regard. But yes, the community financial institutions, we've been big proponents of that ever since we got the details on this new law because of the set aside. So for those small companies, less than 10 employees, if you happen to be in a low income area, these set-asides are designed specifically for your business. So go out and take advantage of that. Successfully reaching smaller borrowers. So you can see here the 82% of the loans now are under 100,000. So in the original release of PPP, it was 150 was the category at that point. So it's definitely, it seems to be achieving the objective that our legislators had designed this program for. And you can see how it's broken up by approved numbers as well. So all of these slides will be available on our replay. So if you want to study these and understand a little bit more deeply about what's going on, and I'm moving too fast for you, not to worry, we'll have all these available for you. This slide really talks about the demographic data available for PPP borrowers. You can see that a lot of folks are not providing specific answers on race and ethnicity, nor are they providing answers on gender or veteran side. So a little bit surprising. I will tell you that LMI neighborhoods up here, that is the low income neighborhoods, if you will. So that's basically the designation for low income neighborhoods. And then you can see the designation for rural areas as well, outside of city MSAs. So I think pretty solid representation across the board. This also surprised me a little bit. With the set-asides, I really thought the community banks might take a bigger slice of the pie, but you can see that the large banks are still driving the majority of the PPP lending. And I guess that makes sense. The large banks have got the numbers are just in their favor. So I guess the law of big numbers takes over for them. And a lot of the larger loans are taking place in the larger loan volumes by those banks. But pretty fascinating stuff when you look at it. So micro lenders are still the leader within the low income neighborhoods, not too surprising in that area. But farm credit lenders, that's kind of a little bit of a surprise too. You would have thought farm credit lenders might have been one of the smaller groups in there. So interesting information. This just details that basically every state is taking some advantage of this program, which is a good thing. This pandemic was not concentrated in any one area. It's affected us all. This slide really talks to the fact that accommodation and food services are the leaders in terms of industrial classification code, what type of businesses are taking advantage of this. Surprisingly, educational services are on the low end of that. That did surprise me. There's been a lot of news media around what's going on with schools and schools being closed and having to retrofit and make sure that everybody's got PPE and all the other things. You would think that particularly on the private school side, more and more of those would have been taking advantage of this.
You know, Steve, that's a really interesting point that you make there. I sit on the board of an institution, and this all has to do with philosophy around these programs and whether or not, from a philosophical or ethical perspective, you should take advantage. And this is a relatively affluent educational institution, and they decided not to take the PPP. They were absolutely qualified to take the money, but determined not to because they felt that from an ethical perspective, they may be taking money from other businesses who needed it more. So I think one of the interesting things there is, because most educational institutions are public schools, public universities, public, and then you get this other group that are private. When they are private, they do tend to be affluent. you think I'm on board there, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
I mean, in our family right now, my grandkids I think they've only missed a few days due to weather. And they did shut down for 1 week because of one of the one of the teachers tested positive. But they're in a parochial private school, and that's, to my wife's dismay, those kids have been in school regularly, and while a lot of our neighbor kids that are in public schools have not. So she's kind of missed playing with the grandkids. But yeah, I think that's probably on target. But it's interesting though when you look at it, Marquita, because also arts and entertainment and recreation, and we know real estate, rental, and leasing, all of those businesses have really been hit hard.
Taking a hard hit, yeah.
Yeah, and you would think that they might be looking a little stronger at the aid programs that are available. So
yeah,
fascinating stuff. So yeah, hopefully it's interesting. We're going to get into some of the Paycheck Protection Program forgiveness now, and keep in mind that these are forgiveness applications that have already been processed by the PPP. And this data really surprised me as well. So, to date, they've been through, from a forgiveness standpoint, pretty significant amount, right? Almost a third of the total loan volume has been through and completed the forgiveness process. And as we're going to talk about in a little further in our presentation, SBA is having to go through, because of the Economic Aid Act, and do a second look on all of the forgiveness applications that included provisions related to EIDL. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I'm still, when I think about this, and this was a discussion that we had earlier this morning with an SBA representative, the amount of work that the SBA has produced over the course of the last 11 months is absolutely mind-boggling. Even within the SBA, they're amazed at what they've been able to accomplish. So it really is fascinating. And I think we got to be mindful of the fact that everybody's working with new programs here, and government's never perfect, and you give them a new program and they're certainly going to be somewhat less than perfect, but boy, you got to salute these folks. The SBA has really done a marvelous job. So across all the loan size, 99% of the loan value has been forgiven. Now that's astounding. And this has got some provision, I would imagine, for the changes that took place because of EIDL, but still a pretty astounding number. So, this is aid that really did make it to the business community out there, to help folks provide paychecks directly to employees throughout our country. Because, if they didn't use, if you remember, it was originally 80% of the funds directly to fund the paychecks, and then they kind of ratcheted it down over time to 60% of the funds. So at a very minimum, you can say at least 60% of this money, went directly to the individuals of our country, right?
Yeah.
Through their.
I wonder too if we won't see that 0.8 ratchet its way up to 0.999, because those who applied for forgiveness early did not know the full impact, and I suspect that some of those will go back and get some of that money back. I don't know how that process works, Steve. You know better than I do, but I would imagine that people who applied early probably have a window or an opportunity to go back and have more of their loan forgiven when the changes occurred that gave us the ability to do a different percentage switch between payroll and other business costs.
Yeah, you're right, and I think there will be a lot of that taking place. So yeah, pretty astounding when you see those numbers. And then they also tracked it by type of lender as well. This didn't surprise me. So if you look at this, Marquita, the second line is banks and S&Ls of 10 billion or more. And from the stories that we've heard internally and innovative, I mean, we know that the big banks have really struggled with this stuff. While they've been good at getting a lot of loans out there because they've got the sheer numbers on their side, boy, they sure have had a challenge with the forgiveness side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know my story. Both of my big banks, and I do business with two, have not opened the portal for the less than 50,000 forgiveness process. And that's why I think we probably, with those large banks, have quite a few businesses who are queued up waiting by day. And I mean, certainly we've been getting emails week by week saying, well, wait another couple of days, wait another couple of days. And we've passed the day that we thought for both of these large banks that we would actually go into the portal and complete the easy form, the less than 50,000 form for easy. So that's probably a queue up of businesses who haven't applied yet.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it is amazing in that regard, and we've seen it firsthand through working through this over the course of the last year. And the fundamental thing that we teach in CEO to CEO is, right, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And boy, we sure learned how important this was as it relates to your banking relationship, didn't we?
Oh yeah. So
in times of crisis, you got to have more than one option available to you. And it certainly played itself out over the course of the last 11 months. It's been astounding. But yeah, quite a difference there. So EIDL, completely different program. Total loans, $191 billion in EIDL. So pretty amazing amount of money that's been dispersed in that regard. So EIDL, of course, being the 30-year fixed rate, ultra low interest, ultra low payment loan, but there's 3.7 million borrowers out there that are going to be making EIDL payments over the course of the next 30 years or so anyway. And you can see how it breaks down by approval count. So the vast majority of these loans were relatively small as well, and pretty amazing. And again, touched every state. So yeah, nobody was immune. Not surprising, the big population centers, California, Florida, New York, and Texas. I mean, they're the standouts as they were in the previous graphs. But yeah, big stuff. This was a little bit surprising. So this in the EIDL side, what appears to have happened is that the retail trade got really behind EIDL and led it, versus look at accommodation and food services, only 10%. Surprising. And I think that gets to the fact that a lot of the large trade associations within the accommodation and food services were some of those that were early and active about not taking advantage of some of these programs.
Steve, I wonder, when we look at this chart and we look at the other one, if these charts were put in with a comparison of, if you want to call it market capitalization, I don't know what word to use because these are not publicly traded funds, but if you look at the industry's market cap versus the amount of loans they took out, I wonder if retail trade doesn't amount for more of our contribution to perhaps GDP or something of that nature, so that you would expect they would have more, not so much that they would have more because they needed more or any other reason, but they're just bigger in the economy. I don't know. That would be interesting to see.
It's fascinating though, Marquita. You look at this and some of the lowest ones are manufacturing and distribution, right? Yeah. And then you look at professional, scientific, and technical, which is, all medical professionals fall into that category. And you'd think those folks, maybe they didn't need it as much, but yeah, it is fascinating to see how it shakes out.
Or God forbid, they just didn't know this was available to them and they didn't take advantage because they didn't know, because you really had to be antenna and radar up to get into these programs, and you had to do it fairly quickly. So there also could be an indicator here of just simply having the information available and the ability to turn on a dime and go after some of this funding.
Yep. Yeah, we saw that firsthand too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in terms of the advance, there was a lot of discussion about the advances, right? 8.2 million applications for the advances. And the advance was the advance grant, obviously, that was not necessary to repay. And they've approved $20 billion when that was the cap, and that's when it ran out of money. So this is somewhat fascinating as well. You can see that the vast majority were approved at, from a size perspective, $1,000 to $2,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So 51% of the advances at $1,000. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, because there are, probably our second most frequently asked question is, I only got $1,000. How do I get the other $9,000 of free grant money?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, fascinating stuff. And again, every state, and of course the big four, top the charts there. And here again on the EIDL program as a whole, this is not surprising. Obviously, I think this would follow that in terms of whatever the applicants were. Most of those applicants, it'd be curious to know, of the applicants, how many checked the box that requested the advance grant, right? I mean, I would assume close to 100% would.
Yeah, they should have.
Yeah, I agree. So that's the SBA's kind of overview of the program to date. And I know this print's a little bit small, Marquita. Can you see it okay?
I can. I'm like close to the screen, but I do see it, yes.
Okay, this is the biggest part of our update for the day. And this is what the SBA calls their adjustment plan. And it came out and is effective February 16th. So what this chart will endeavor to share with you is that the SBA has just discovered that all of these months of free payments that were baked into the Economic Aid Act, that probably the SBA doesn't have enough funding to meet all of those requirements. So what they have decided to do is adjust the amount of months of free payments that they provide based on your loan class. Now, I think this is the SBA responding to the current situation that they find themselves in, because the laws changed a little bit here. And if you look in this top line, what I'm going to be sharing with you is, if you have an SBA loan product that was funded before March 27th of 2020, then there are two particular paths we got to walk down to find out how is this free payment program going to affect you. If you have an SBA loan product, and this would apply to 7A loans, 504 loans, and micro loans. If you have an SBA loan product that you received from March 27th of 2020 to September 27th of 2020, the law has different criteria for you. So we gotta walk down these, and we'll come back to each of those. Unfortunately, if you received an SBA loan between September 28th and January 31st of 2021, you are not eligible for any of the free payments. So that's a loophole. We've talked about this in a couple of our prior webinars. They still haven't addressed it. Who knows? They may address it. Congress is certainly talking about the next step of COVID aid and contemplating somewhere around a $1.9 trillion additional bill. So maybe that would be the point where that would be addressed. And then finally, if you are taking out a new SBA loan from February 1st to September 30th of this year, this is what would apply to you. So let me walk you through this. And again, if you had an existing loan before March 27th of 2020, and that was funded before September 27th of 2020, then the SBA automatically made 6 months of payments for you, up to $9,000 a month. That's already taken place. For loans that were current and in processing, the SBA already did that. And we're certainly aware of lots of companies within our network that were able to take advantage of that. The new Economic Aid Act said that you would then be eligible for what they said would be an additional 3 months of payments in what is considered a round 2 funding scenario. And we're talking about the Economic Aid Act that went into effect December 27th. Now what the SBA has done is they've said, we're not going to have enough money to fund all these programs. So they've ratcheted that down from 3 payments to 2 payments. But again, it's still $18,000 worth of free money, right? So while you're not going to get 3, you definitely will be able to get 2 under the SBA adjustment plan. And then if your business was in one of the underserved business categories, and we'll share that with you next, they originally said you would be eligible for up to 5 additional months of payments. And now they've ratcheted that down to 3 additional months because they don't believe they're going to have funding to be able to meet all of these requirements. The next column says if your loan funded after September 27th of 2020. So you might have been approved beforehand, but if you didn't get the money until after September 27th, then you would have gotten 3 months of your first payments made. The original law called for you to get 6, so they cut that in half. In addition to that, you would, under the new law, get an additional 2 months. And then again, if you happen to be in one of those underserved markets, and we'll talk about that in just a second, you were eligible, according to the law, for an additional 5 months, and they've cut that down to 3 additional months. So still, you know, if you received funding for a loan on September 28th or later for a new SBA program, but the loan was approved before March 27th, you have the ability to get up to 8 months in total payments in that regard. Pretty nice deal. The next category of potential borrowers would be those that fall.
Steve,
yes, ma'am.
Before you move into that category, let me just quickly make an announcement for our participants. I noticed that some people are raising their hands. If you have a question, go ahead and type your question into the Q&A box, and we'll address that question during the webinar.
Excellent. So the next category of borrowers would be those that applied for and received funding between March 27th and September 27th. And again, depending upon the date that your loan funded, you would have received either 3 or 6 months of payments made on your behalf. And for loans that were funded within that period of time, they were not eligible for the second round payments. So the first round of payments were all that were eligible. It's these poor folks that fall within the September 28th to January 31st timeframe that are going to feel left out of the party and won't have anything available to them. And then right now, for loans that are made approved and funded between February 1st and September 30th, they originally were saying that they were going to make the first 6 payments for you. Now, under this SBA adjustment plan, they're saying that that's going to be 3 months of payments made. So clearly, one of the things that might be included in this next round of COVID aid that Capitol Hill is contemplating may be enough funding to get back to funding what the law intended to allow. And we'll just have to see how that shakes out, which means, Marquita, we're gonna have more to talk about at some point in the near future.
Obviously, but one of the questions that I think about right now that Steve, maybe we can talk about a little bit while this chart sits here, is if you are a business and you recognize yourself in any one of these 4 categories that we're talking about here, I'm thinking about what it is that you do, and I'm part of what I'm thinking in the back of my head is this SBA payment on your behalf reflected in the loan documents, the promissory note, or anything of that nature? Or is this a one-off sort of a situation? And what is the, I don't want to call it recourse, but process that a business owner should go to ensure that they're clear on what category they fall into and are able to track when those funds or what months those payments are made on their behalf?
So the first thing you can do as a business owner is be aware of 2 dates. When was your loan approved? What was your approval date on your loan? And when was your disbursement date on your loan, right? So you will know both of those from your loan documents, and you will have both of those available to you. I don't think there's any real recourse. I don't think that there's going to be any loan amendments that takes place, but what you should be receiving is an email communication or a letter from the SBA, basically delineating exactly what level of benefits that you are applicable for. And lenders are getting this information basically at the same time that we've received it. So, this is brand new information in the marketplace right now. And I know that, everybody's trying to digest it.
Okay.
So, did that answer your questions, Marquita?
It did, and I think the bottom line is you'd need to go find out with your bank, probably, or the SBA.
Yeah, pull your loan documents.
Yeah, absolutely. So Steve had a comment, and this is not you, Steve. This is Steve, our participant, and he says under the current plan, February 1st to September 30th. Are there no provisions? It's a question for underserved industries to get additional payments beyond the 3 months. So
I believe that does. So I think that's just probably an oversight on my part of building it. I'll go back and confirm that, but I believe that yes, that you do. Underserved does apply under that scenario as well.
Okay. And so what we'll do, Steve, I will leave this question out, and we will, Steve, are we still putting out a Q&A recap?
Yes,
okay.
We are.
We'll put a Q&A recap when we upload this to our YouTube channel and our Google Docs, and we'll have a clear answer for you on that. But I think Steve pretty much answered it live, but we'll confirm that on the Google Docs. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that that's still is in play. I just didn't reflect it on this chart.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of had my eyes going sideways as I was looking at this thing, but this is distilling a relatively large written document. And again, I think I've got this correct, and I'll go back through the details and make sure that we get those things buttoned up as well. So here is, what does underserved mean? So underserved is those specific NAICS codes that was originally scheduled to deliver 5 months of free payments, and now they've changed it to say that it's going to be 3 months. So if your business operates within any of these NAICS codes, you should have been a recipient of those additional 3 months of payments made on your behalf. And all of those payments, again, just for everybody's benefit, I know the chart had said it on there, it's a maximum of $9,000 per month per borrower. And it only applies to 1 loan per borrower. So if you had multiple loans, this is only going to apply to 1 loan. So it's still a pretty nice benefit all in all. So let me also share with you a couple of additional things. So the other thing that the SBA has changed in the intervening weeks here is they said that the 90% guarantee and the fee adjustment is going to be retroactive for all 7A loans that were approved after December 27th. So if you happen to have a loan in process and you received that loan, shortly after this December 27th date, then if that would have been potentially under the approved under the constraints of the law before the Economic Aid Act, which would mean that your loan guarantee could potentially be 85% or 75%. Those will now be jumped up to 90%. And if you were charged a fee, which was common, there is an SBA guarantee fee that is always applied for SBA loans. If you were charged a fee on that loan, you would get that fee refunded to you. So that is one little benefit that has come out that was a little unexpected, I would say. The other thing they did is they have come out and formally said that there will be no 1099 miscellaneouses filed. So unfortunately, what happened is some of the lenders did issue 1099 miscellaneous because they had that in process, and the law changed and became law on December 27th, right? So they couldn't reverse that process. But what the SBA has said now is, if a 1099 miscellaneous income was issued to a borrower, then the lender must file back with the borrower a corrected form. So lenders will be sending out corrected 1099 forms in those cases where this happened. And that is another directive from the SBA. So these are a couple of additional terms that have just come out. So, as I said, probably one of the most popular questions we're getting is EIDL program, and I've really broken this down into two areas. So first off, I want to talk about advanced reconciliation payments. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you were very diligent and you received a PPP loan early in the process, you used the funds in either an 8 or 24-week period, and you were working with a bank that allowed you to apply for forgiveness. And remember, that forgiveness window opened up around the 1st of October, right? And you were diligent and got your forgiveness application in and were very quick at getting forgiveness back. Your loan forgiveness may well have been reduced by the amount of an EIDL grant that you received. So remember, the original applications for forgiveness asked you to reduce the amount of your loan forgiveness by the amount of your EIDL grant. Well, the SBA knows all of those now because the lenders had to type all that information into the SBA system. And what the SBA is now doing is they are remitting that EIDL grant amount back to the lender. So the SBA is writing the lender a check for the amount of that grant and instructing the lender to notify the borrower that the entire loan has been forgiven. And all that's happening automatically. So you as a borrower don't necessarily need to do anything, but if this is a situation that describes something that happens to you, you certainly need to be on the lookout for it. And if you don't receive something from your lender or the SBA in the near future, that would be, I think, the appropriate time for you to raise your hand and see what's going on. So Marquita, does that fully explain the advanced reconciliation payment side of this ledger?
Yeah, I think I understand it. And one of the things that it causes me to think is probably in the future, as we offer these, it might be worth our while to bring a banker and an accountant on, because here is the issue here for me is I know that every time we did something with any of these loans, we put an entry in our QuickBooks. We use QuickBooks as our accounting system. So we've got entries out there, and now this is changing those entries. So there are two things going on here. One is from an accounting perspective, what you need to be on the lookout for to accurately correctly correct it, accurately correct this. And then the other piece of it being just from your legal documents relative to the loan, what do you need? Because if it were not forgiven, there should probably be some indication that you owe that money and need to start paying it at some point in the future, when in fact now it retroactively will be forgiven. And I think it would be probably helpful if we ever saw or could get a hold of copies of these communications and what they look like, so that business owners who have had this happen, and I don't think there are a lot, because I think a lot of people were waiting for the reduced or the improved forgiveness process, but people who did go early are going to have some cleanup, and they really need to make sure that their legal files, their loan files, and their QuickBooks or their accounting files are corrected, given that they did this early.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple of accountants scheduled in the near future. So we've got two different firms that have agreed to come on with us and help explain some of this stuff. So that I think will be helpful. And you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of business owners, as you and I well know, and working with business owners in our CEO to CEO program, a lot of them are going to need some help making sure that their accounting logs are correct. And
they're unwinding this whole thing correctly. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's great advice there, and we will see those folks on future webinars here. The other side of the EIDL is the whole advance grant, because Congress came out in the Economic Aid Act on December 27th and said, if you receive less than a $10,000 advance grant, we're going to allocate this bucket of money over here, and you should be eligible for receiving a copy of that grant if you requested it. So there's been a lot of discussion about, how do I request an advance grant? Do I need to reapply? What do I need to do? And the SBA came out with a document and said, no application process is necessary here. If you had made application for advance grant and they have all of that application information, they are going to comb back through their records and get back to you. And they are now targeting borrowers, and they've released this in large official language, if you will, that I've taken the liberty of condensing here onto this slide for our webinar purposes, to say that they are going to follow a two-step process of targeting borrowers for eligibility on the advance grant. So they're starting with looking at hard-hit businesses of less than 300 employees in low-income communities. So again, if you think back to that underserved list of SIC codes, I would say it's a pretty safe bet that that's probably where they're starting, is in those areas, and then sorting them by the size of companies and making sure that they're in these, to check to see if they're in these low-income communities. And those are the folks that they're processing first. And their thought process seems to be, we're going to try our best to serve the hardest hit first, and then work our way through everybody else that is applicable for this. After they get through that list, and you can imagine that's got to be a pretty good size list in and of itself as you think about that in all 50 states, then they say they are going to go through the list of everybody that applied for an EIDL advance grant before December 27th and receive no grant. And then after they get through those, they'll see what's left over and go through the balance of the applications. So the SBA has come out and said, clearly, you don't need to contact us, because I understand that they're getting a lot of inquiry on this, but they've come out and said, you don't need to contact us. However, be aware and check your business email, because we will be contacting you if our screening determines that you are eligible for additional advance grant monies. And they specifically call out that to just be on the lookout for any email in your inbox, and utilizing the email that you would have put on your application, any email that has an @sba.gov suffix to it. So be on the lookout for that. And if you have probably, I don't know about Outlook because we use the Google platform, but I know you can set up an alert for that in your inbox as well. So I guess what they're telling us is don't call us, we'll call you.
The old proverbial saying, don't call us, we'll call you. And you know, Steve, I've called them twice already and I keep calling them. I don't listen to that.
Well, I also believe, Marquita, that the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
There you go. Grease the skids if I have to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Persistence pays off 100% of the time. So this is what we know on the EIDL program. This is the latest information from the SDA, and hopefully this will help answer some questions that maybe some of our participants have. We are also getting an awful lot of questions regarding the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. And frankly, we thought it'd be open by now. And the couple of contacts that I've got within the SBA have told me the same thing, that they're still working on it. But again, you know, I've said this many times. I'm going to continue to say it. We got to give the SBA a lot of grace, because boy, those folks have really worked hard, and man, have they done an amazing job for our country. I think, you know, I think the healthcare workers have, you know, certainly deserve our standing ovation and applause. And right next to them needs to stand the folks of the SBA, because those folks have really worked hard. What they are saying is that first and foremost, I'm going to give you some eligibility requirements and a couple of things you need to get done if you believe that you would be applicable for one of these Shuttered Venue Operator grants. So the first level of qualification is your business had to be in operation as of February 29th of 2020. And you also need to be aware that you cannot apply and receive both the PPP and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant if you are making application for the PPP after December 27th. So there may be some folks sitting on the sidelines on the PPP. I would think a wise operator would be sitting on the sidelines of the PPP for, you know, for the next several days, waiting on this Shuttered Venue Operators Grant to open, because again, this is a grant, and it's a grant for up to, you know, 45% of your operating income, of your gross revenues, 45% of your gross revenues for the year of 2019. So it could be a pretty significant grant. You're going to have a pretty good amount of documentation, and the SBA has already begun to tell us what that includes. So first and foremost, they've said you're going to have good documentation on your 2019 revenues and your 2020 revenues. And you're going to need to measure the difference to be able to see that you've had, you know, a significant impact. And I don't think the impact is going to be hard, except the fact that you're just going to have to measure it and be able to highlight it. The other thing is you're going to need to have all of your documentation on how many employees you had, particularly for 2020. I'd go further and say, make sure you do that for 2019 as well. So, you know, keep close at hand your 941s for 2019 and 2020, and it might be in your best interest, while we're waiting for the windows to open, to, you know, run some comparisons and make sure you've got the numbers easily at hand. They're also going to be asking for some specific documentation on your businesses, and their guidance specifically calls out floor plans, contract copies, and then they say, et cetera. So don't know exactly what all this is relating to, but you know, make sure, as we've talked about in all these aid programs, that you've got the significant documentation for your particular business close at hand. They are going to open this up based on severity of impact. So if you were the most severely impacted, they're going to open it up in 14-day windows based on your severity of impact. So if you've had, and I think you can go back to the webinar that we did 3 weeks ago, and we've got all the details on that. But if memory serves, it was 75% or more at the highest level, and so forth. The other thing, and this is key, if you are going to have to register your business in the SAM government system in order to be able to apply for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, which means that you must have a DUNS number. This is a Dun & Bradstreet number. Not all corporations will have a DUNS number. As a matter of fact, I did a search earlier in the week for one of our clients that has one of these venues, and they do not have a Dun & Bradstreet number. So they had to go apply for that number. So you can do a quick check by calling Dun & Bradstreet, reach out to your accountant or your attorney as well, some trusted advisor within your network that may have a subscription to Dun & Bradstreet. They can run a quick search and see if Dun & Bradstreet has you in their database. If they don't, you need to get registered in their database so that you can get a DUNS number, because that DUNS number is a requirement of registering in the SAM government system. So that's something you guys can do right now if you happen to be in this type of business and anticipate taking advantage of the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And hopefully it'll put you in a position where you're ready to go as soon as the application window opens. So Marquita, any questions on those?
No, let's keep going.
All quiet today. Okay. All right. Finally, had a lot of talk about employee retention tax credit. How do we qualify, and what's available to us? So qualifications: if you had either a full or partial suspension of your operations during any calendar quarter because of governmental orders, you automatically qualify. So this would mean if you were deemed to be non-essential and your business had to close for a period of time, you're in. The second way you could meet qualification is if you have a significant decline in gross revenues in your business. And for 2020, they mean revenues on a quarterly basis have to be 50% or more off by 50% or more. And then in 2021, your revenue's got to be off by 20% or more. So one of two ways to qualify in that regard. And just to remind our audience that for 2020, if you received a PPP loan, you were not eligible to take advantage of the Employee Retention Tax Credit. But the Economic Aid Act changed that on December 27th. So now you can take advantage of both programs. The only caveat is you can't use PPP funds for payroll expenses that you also claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit for. So you can't double dip, but you can use both programs and make sure that you layer them appropriately so you get the best advantage of both. And I just want to call out that for 2021, it's pretty significant. It's up to $7,000 per quarter. So any event, a nice additional level of aid that's available. And that is the sum total of our update for the week. Holy cow, an hour's worth of stuff to talk about again.
Really, Steve, your timing is impeccable. So we do have some questions coming in. So I'm going to open the Q&A dialogue, and it was a question. It was a thank you. And I see we're at 3:56, so about 4 minutes to go. So let's go ahead and wind down. That was an awful lot that we covered. For me personally, the biggest takeaway, I'll give my own takeaway, and then Steve, I'll turn it over to you and let you give your takeaway and close us out here today. And this is just breathe through this process. I mean, this is sort of where I was when I saw the information that we received last week or earlier this week. And that is, why don't they just stop and just leave it as it is? But the fact of the matter is, there is a good reason for why this is happening. And we just have to keep our antenna. I use the term, keep your antenna up, keep your radar out, because things are changing. And don't think that because you hear from one source, or you heard last week that one thing, you know, a description of the program and what you're eligible for, and you just moved on. Things change. This is a fluid event. And I think, as Steve says earlier, the SBA is doing a phenomenal job of processing this. Our lending institutions, our bank partners, are doing a phenomenal job of processing us through these programs. And the fact of the matter is, the programs are so helpful to us as business. And I think at some point we're going to circle back around and do a sort of a recap, or the SBA or the federal government will do a recap on, were these programs designed and did they accomplish what they should have? We got a little hint of that early in this presentation today, but I can tell you from where I sit, these programs have made the difference in many instances of businesses that I've looked at as to whether or not they're in business today or not. And I think as we come to the end of this, and I like to say we're coming to the end of this COVID emergency, now that we're all beginning to be vaccinated, and we think that we're going to be out and we will be returning to our workplaces in the way we did it before, or at least somewhat like we did it before, that these programs, we will look back and say, this really saved U.S. business. So I guess my bottom line on this is, let's just be patient. Let's, you know, take a deep breath and let's go with the flow, because I don't think these are our last changes. Steve, you get the very last word.
Yeah, Marquita, God bless you. I just underscore everything you just said. You've marvelous wrap up. I think you're 100% on target.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. We will be back next week, 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock Central Standard Time, Thursday afternoon. And we look forward to seeing all of you then. And as always, we will post the recording of this webinar along with a Q&A and other documents that were presented here. The webinar will be on our YouTube channel, and the documents will be, there will be a link on the YouTube channel to the Google Docs portal, where you will be able to see all the documents. So thanks so much for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.
God bless you. See you later.